What's that? Just like that? Oh, Thanos snapped them? I hope not. Well, at least the good ones survived. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So, how are we doing today? Okay. Apparently there's a war on.
No.
Yeah, what do you guys think of that?
It's amazing.
It's amazing? How so?
It's just fun.
It's fun? Like what, you were bored? Like there was, the whole world is a dumpster fire and you were bored and you wanted something exciting, or what?
Yeah, like go get another nice something
Something new?
new. Entertaining.
Can't it be something good for once? Like pandemics and protests and wars, and can it be like, unicorns discovered?
But like you see, I get to tell my children that I was part of the world.
You're not part of it.
But like I was alive.
You're sitting there on your laptop,
But I was alive, you see.
drinking a Starbucks probably. You're not part of the war. What are you talking about?
But like I was alive. Really.
Yes, you were definitely alive. You will be able to tell your kids and your grandkids, back in my day during the war, it was quite a time. I don't know. Regina's like, this teacher is like the weirdest. Okay, well, there is something to that, right? This is, in this class before, I used to say, there's so much happens in the 20th century, in the period we're studying. It kind of makes the 21st century seem kind of boring because not really that much has happened. But, never mind. Cancel that. Things are happening.
Is it actually World War III or?
Well, I wouldn't say the whole world is at war. I would say that Russia has launched a war on Ukraine, and people are trying to sanction Russia and support Ukraine as best they can, but nobody else is really fighting, just the two of them. So, but that's the thing, right, is that the world is much more connected than it was in 1914 or in 1939, so it's easy to, we're gonna feel the effects of it more than people would have felt in the past, I think. What do you think, Regina? You don't know? What don't you know? You know anything? Okay, well, let's dive in here because we're going to leave V for Vendetta and we're going to get back into kind of real history. So I'm going to jump us ahead. We talked about all that. Yes. So where we left off was this, right? I had asked you to read a massive section of the textbook, which was cruel and unusual, but I asked you to do it anyway. And it was kind of the end of World War II. Right? And so we talked a little bit about the Pacific War and how Japan had these sort of imperial but also industrial ambitions, and it led them to try to take over territory in China, in Manchuria, but also they were trying to sort of gain political or military control of Southeast Asia, right? And so they kind of went about their plan to do that. They launched attacks on all kinds of South Pacific nations like Hong Kong and Formosa, which is now Taiwan, and the Philippines. And of course, they also attacked Pearl Harbor in the US, right? And of course, that brought the US into a conflict with Japan. The US kind of sat back for a few years while they resolved things in Europe. But then once the Nazis were defeated, the Americans kind of turned their attention to Japan, pushed them off of all of the islands that the Japanese had conquered, just like this, and eventually found themselves on the shores of the island of Japan itself, right? And then, of course, there was the question about how to end this war now that this new super weapon had been created, right? So atomic weapons were brand new technology. They were just tested as successful. And President Harry Truman had the choice to use them, right? And of course, he did, right? There was a lot of, and we talked about kind of the pros and cons, right? But from Harry Truman's perspective, the pros for using the atomic weapons are pretty significant, right? A massive saving in cost, a massive saving in human lives, or at least the human lives of the Americans, and the ability to end the war, and to end the war in a way that didn't really require the cooperation of the Soviet Union, right? Because we said that, once the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union thought, okay, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? I'm going to join forces with the British and the Americans, and we'll defeat the Nazis. But as they get closer and closer to defeating the Nazis, those two sides become more and more distrustful of each other, right? And so at this point, the Americans are only too happy to not cooperate with the Soviets and just finish this war themselves. And they do, right? They drop those, where's my slide here? There. Yeah, they drop those atomic weapons, 2 of them. Japan surrenders and the war is over, right? But unfortunately, one war is ending and another one is beginning, right? So World War II is now over, but we have a pretty significant shift in global power, right? The European powers, Britain and France and Germany, those powers kind of dominated the late 1800s and the early 1900s. But after 2 devastating world wars, they're kind of bankrupt, right? They just don't have the power that they used to have. And it's actually the Soviet Union and the US that will kind of rise and become the 2 big powers for the second half of the 20th century, right? And this kind of brings us to, which is kind of odd considering current events in the world, but that brings us to the story of Russia, right? And the story of Russia is an important one because it's really difficult to imagine the 20th century without it, okay? The Cold War was such a significant event, and it went on for decades, right? From the end of World War II until 1991, basically. And so Cold War was so long, it really shaped everything that occurred within those 40 years, right? And so, imagining a world without the Soviet Union is really difficult to do, right? And so, and especially now, given current events, how they are unfolding, I think it's probably useful to know the story of Russia and what happens to Russia and how it shapes the second half of the 20th century, but also how it continues to shape what's happening now. Because I guarantee, if you don't know this already, you will see it in the next few weeks. What's happening right now has its roots in the Soviet Union, right? Vladimir Putin has his roots in the Soviet Union. Ukraine's relationship with Russia has its roots in the Soviet Union. And what's happening right now over there is really all about the Soviet Union, right? And so it's important to talk about these things. So very quickly, we've seen this slide before because we said that after World War I, there were kind of new political systems that were appearing, okay? And prior to World War I, most countries had monarchies, right? They had a king or a queen or something like that. And some of them were also kind of constitutional monarchies. So they had a democracy and a king as well, right? Britain was like this and a few other places as well. So it was kind of a mix of democracy and of monarchy. But a couple of new political systems appeared, right? And we talked about fascism in detail with Nazi Germany, but now we'll talk about communism, because communism is brand new for the 20th century as well. And if you remember, communism came about through the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Okay, there's Marx. There's Marx, epic beard. Born in 1818. He's a smart guy, right? He's university educated, historian, political scientist, wrote things. Has two famous works that people refer to. It's actually quite bright outside, so I'm just going to turn our lights out here. Two famous works that people still cite all the time: Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. And so Marx is kind of around for that first age of industrial capitalism. Okay, so this is like in Britain and Germany and France. Factories are going up all over the place. People are coming in from the countryside to work in these factories. They're working very, very hard, right? There's no labor laws really. So people are working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day for as little as these factory owners can get away with paying them, right? Just enough to keep them from walking out the door. So people, according to Karl Marx anyway, he felt that they were being exploited. He felt that capitalism was exploitive, right? Because, in modern terms anyway, thousands and thousands and thousands of people work for Amazon, right? But they all get paid a very basic wage, right? They're not really making a lot of money. But Jeff Bezos is making billions of dollars, right? And is Jeff Bezos really working billions of times harder than anyone else? No, right? Amazon works because his employees are working really hard to make it happen. It's not really about him, he just happens to own it, right? And so Karl Marx would look at that and say, he's exploiting all those people. Amazon is making tons and tons of profit, right? Billions of dollars, but the people who are actually doing the work are not really seeing the benefit of that. They're getting paid the same thing last year as they got paid the year before, as they got paid the year before. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos's bank account keeps growing and growing and growing. Those people aren't really seeing the fruit of their labor, right? They're not really seeing any of the profit. And Marx says, yeah, he's exploiting them. That's wrong, right? Really what needs to happen is that the proletariat, all of the Amazon workers, they need to realize this, right? They need to see that Jeff Bezos is exploiting them. They need to overthrow the bourgeoisie, overthrow Jeff Bezos, take control of Amazon for themselves, and then spread the profits equally among them, okay? And when they did, then they would have socialism, right? They would have a system that was fair to everyone, right? Everyone worked as hard as they could, and everyone would receive a share of the profit, of the benefit, right? Karl Marx says that's fair, right? Capitalism is not fair, according to him. So just a very quick to sort of differentiate these things, because we'll hear socialism and communism used a lot, right? Sometimes in the same way, sometimes a little different. So socialism is the economic system, okay? So here in Canada, for instance, we have capitalism, right? That's our economic system. We buy and sell things, and businesses are, for the most part, owned by regular people. They're not owned by the government. There's a few that are, right? The government does own some businesses, but most of it is owned by private individuals, right? So here in Canada, we have capitalism, and our political system is democracy, right? That's what we have. Yes? True? Okay. When we talk about these two, socialism is the economic system, okay? And in a socialist system, the government basically owns everything, okay? Everything is owned by the government. All the companies are government-owned and run companies. Private citizens don't really own anything, okay? The political system that runs that is called communism, okay? So communism is the political system. Socialism is the economic system, right? Here in the West, we have democracy as our political system. and capitalism as our economic system. Right? In China, for instance, they have a political system that is communist, right? Because there's a communist party in charge of China, but their economic system is not socialism, right? It's more of a planned capitalism. It's a tightly controlled capitalism, or a more controlled capitalism. So they've kind of got a mix of two different things, right? Most of the time you see capitalism and democracy going together. But again, China has become something different. They started out with communism and socialism, but the socialism part wasn't really working. And so they were able to kind of be flexible enough to create an economy that was kind of capitalist and allowed people to kind of to benefit from it that way. But the Communist Party is still in control. Okay. So is that a little confusing, or does that make things easier? Better or worse? Worse? So I had no effect. Everything is still the same as it was before. Okay. It's okay. We'll talk about it more. It'll make sense. Okay. So this is what Marx was proposing in his writings. He was proposing a system where the people owned the means of production. People own the businesses collectively, right? And everybody shares, right? It doesn't matter who you are or what your job is. You do your best, you work hard, and you will get a share of the benefit of the country, right? That's what he proposed. But until 1917, it was just kind of a theory, right? It was just, communism only existed in writing. It didn't really exist in real life. Not the way democracy did, anyway. But it was going to be this guy who changed all that. Yeah, it was going to be this guy that changed all that. Oh shoot! And he changed all that. Sorry, I just remembered something. He changed all that because he was a reader of many political and economic theorists. He did read Karl Marx, and when he saw it, he thought, this is a good idea. This is useful, right? This is what I think we should do, because Vladimir Lenin, of course, as a Russian, was living in Russia in the early 1900s, and Russia was, lots of people describe it as a backward country. I don't really like to call it that, but other people have called it kind of a backward country in that it wasn't very industrialized, right? So Britain and France and Germany had kind of more modern economies and factories and technologies. Russia wasn't really doing any of that at the time. Almost everybody were farmers. And so Russia was kind of a very poor country. It was a very agricultural country. Everybody was farming. It was not a rich country. It was not even agriculturally speaking, it wasn't a successful country. Russia's pretty cold during certain points of the year, so they have kind of a short growing season. And so really all Russia had was a bunch of millions and millions of poor farmers, and then a very narrow upper class. So the Tsar, the royal family, and sort of the nobles at the top of society, they were doing okay. They were very, very rich, but basically everybody was poor and unhappy and sometimes facing food shortages. And so, he looked at this and he was like, Russia is ripe for a revolution, right? Things need to change. The people aren't happy. And Lenin here thought that with communism and socialism, this is the way, right? This is the way that we can fix our country. So, spoiler alert, he's going to lead a revolution, but we'll get to that in a bit, okay? So, Russia is going to have a revolution, right? The existing political structure is going to be overthrown, and Lenin and his Bolsheviks are going to take control and create a communist state, the world's first communist state. Okay. Again, this is a hugely important event. I don't know if anyone has rank ordered the most important events of the 20th century, but this one's got to be in the top 5, if not in the top 3. This is huge because the Russian Revolution, this kind of seizing of control by the communists, by the Bolsheviks, changes everything about Russian history. So whatever Russia's kind of history and path was before that, this was like a total left turn, right? Everything changed in Russia because of this. And because Russia became so powerful, it changed everything about world history in the second half of the 20th century. There is no way to understate this. This was a huge event, which we'll talk about a little later. But before we get there, I've got a little reading for you to do, but I'm just going to introduce this family to you. This is the Tsar, the last Tsar of Russia, kind of like a king, if you will. The last Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II. Okay, so that's Nicholas. I think his wife's name was Ekaterina, if I remember. And his children are kind of around him. His youngest boy there down in front, his youngest son is named Alexei. And Alexei is kind of... Tsar Nicholas spent a lot of time worrying about Alexei because he had hemophilia. Do you know what that is? Hemophilia? It's when your blood doesn't clot very well. So, yeah, so if Alexei cut himself, or if he fell really hard, where you might get a bruise, we get a bruise because our blood will clot and stop bleeding, but he won't. So any kind of fall or cut could be potentially fatal to Alexei because he actually just won't stop bleeding. And so Tsar Nicholas was very kind of concerned with the health of his youngest son, his only son. So he's very concerned with that, but what he wasn't concerned with so much was the plight of the Russian people. And again, they were quite poor. They were trying to make a living farming, but they weren't really using any modern farming techniques. There was no machinery really. And so people were often working very hard. They were very poor. And often they had famines and food shortages. And so people are living a very basic existence and not a very good one. Tsar Nicholas, of course, is living lifestyles of the rich and famous, right? Yeah, here's our poor peasants looking maybe not so happy. I don't know. But here's where we'll start. Okay, so a few pages from the textbook, a few questions, just to give us the basics of where Russia starts out. And I think this section might talk about the revolution too, but we'll see. I've got to jog my memory. Let me just see. Yeah, okay. This will take us into the revolution. So I'll let you read this. For online people, I'm just going to pop this into Microsoft Teams for you to read. So just give me 30 seconds here to do that. Okay. Okay, online people, that should be in Microsoft Teams for you. So I'll give you some time and then we'll talk about these questions, okay? Excuse me. Anyway. Okay, good people. Would you like to take a little break? Little break? Okay, let's do it. Have a break. We'll come back. We'll finish this, okay? There we go. Okay, so we're in the process of reading here. A few more minutes, maybe? Yeah? Okay. I'll put a few more minutes on the clock just so we can keep track, and then we'll talk about these, okay? There we go. Okay, people. Can we talk about this? No? Nobody's speaking to me anymore? You're all tired of me after 7 weeks? Won't this guy just like leave us alone? All right. No, I won't, is the answer to that. I will not leave you alone. Okay, so first question starts off all the way back in 1905. Yikes. What caused this Russo-Japanese War? Avi, what caused this war? That was definitely a deer in the headlights look from you.
The bombing?
The bombing?
Yeah.
What bombing? Sorry, I shouldn't laugh at you, but sometimes things are funny. Good effort though. Good attempt. Regina, what do you got? I'll come back to you.
Is it because at first the Russian wanted to build an empire basically in the Asia?
Who did, Russia or Japan?
Russia.
Russia, okay.
But then they had a competitor which was Japan, and they were defeated.
Yeah, they kind of were, right? So I don't. For Russia, I'm not so sure it was an empire thing, but they definitely wanted the.
Big empire.
Does it say that?
I just read it.
Okay. Okay. Did I miss that? I didn't think it was an empire thing. Where is that? Is it on 71? Oh, yeah.
Planned for Pacific Empire.
Oh, I guess they did. All right. You're right, Regina. Time to switch places. No? Right. So, as Regina states here, both sides are kind of looking for the same thing, right? Both sides are in the process of trying to build a Pacific empire. And both sides want Manchuria as for access to natural resources, right? Lots of timber, lots of mining. And so they kind of both want it for the same reasons. And we talked about the fact that Japan was in the process of trying to industrialize. And like Regina told us, they're actually going to succeed, right? The Japanese are actually going to beat the Russians. And so what effect does that have on both countries? What effect does that have on the Japanese? Yeah, winning the Russo-Japanese War.
Allow them to access to the big part of Asia.
Yeah, they got what they wanted, right? They were able to access those resources that would help them to industrialize. So, yay Japan, right? What else did it kind of do for them? I'm not sure if they said this or if they implied it, but.
I don't know. I don't have enough time to read through all the things.
Okay, that's okay. That is true. I think the other thing is that it was a big kind of. It was kind of a big ego boost for Japan, right? They, as the text implies, they probably shouldn't have won that war. They're kind of a small country. They didn't really have the resources that Russia had. Russia probably should have beat them, but they didn't, right? And so not only does Japan get access to the resources it needs, but it's also, that's a big boost, right? It's like, yeah, we did it. Like we beat this European power, right? For the first time ever, really. But of course, for the Russians, it's kind of the opposite situation, right? They don't get what they want, but also super embarrassing, right? To like get into a war with a much smaller country that everybody kind of writes off, and then to lose, oof, embarrassing, right? Super embarrassing. So that's one of the things that kind of undermines the leadership of the Tsar, right? They get involved in a war that they really should win, and then they lose, right? Really embarrassing. So let's see. How should we transition to this next question here? Well, let's just ask it. What's this Bloody Sunday? What happens? What happens on Bloody Sunday? Okay, Abby, I'm coming back to you now. There was no bombing.
Bloody Sunday happened in Russia,
Okay.
and
There was no bombing.
it had to do with the labor.
Okay, good. Had to do with labor.
Yeah.
Not bad so far.
They didn't have work.
Okay, I'm gonna put vodka in this on Monday. Oh boy, okay. So it's true, it was about labor, right? There was a lot of labor unrest and agricultural unrest in Russia at the time, right? Food shortages, poverty, people who were working long hours at low pay. There was no labor laws in existence. There was no kind of labor safety laws in existence. Everyone's unhappy, right? And then on Bloody Sunday, what happens?
The workers come out and rebel, I guess.
They what?
They come out and say we need some kind of protections, and I guess as the police come out and kill some of them, and then make all the workers in the country just don't feel good and just come out and protest even more.
Right. So that's very true, right? So an Orthodox minister, Father Gapon, and a group of workers marched to the Winter Palace to make their case to the Russian government, right, to the Tsar. But of course, the guards, the palace guards, get a little nervous when they see these people, and they start shooting, killing a bunch of them, and again, making people even more upset, right, and hostile to the government. And so as we kind of move into 1914, we see that everything is kind of a disaster, right? And that's kind of that's what they talk about here in number 4, right? What do we learn about Russia's domestic economy? So the financial state of Russia. What do we learn about it?
They were the fourth major power in the world.
They were the 4th major power in the world, right? Which sounds good, right? But it's, they're not a lot of countries are industrialized at this point, right? And so, there's the big 3, right? Britain, France, and Germany, and then everyone else is kind of quite far below, right? And so Russia is the 4th most powerful or industrialized country in the world, but that's probably not as good as it sounds, at the moment. But yes, that's very true, right? What else do we know?
Only 1.75% of Russia's population is employed in
Yeah, 1.75? Yeah. So less than 2% of Russia's population is involved in industry, right? That's pretty small, right? They have a very minimal manufacturing sector. Most of what they do is farming, right? What else do we learn about the economy? What else do we learn about the economy?
has a shortcoming.
What's that?
The domestic economy.
Yeah, there was a shortcoming. Yeah. So what does that mean, do you think?
Running out of money.
Yeah, and probably kind of everything, right? There's not really enough to go around, not enough food, not enough money. Oh, the Russians are hacking me again.
Is this the time of like the princess things? Like, if they don't have bread, why don't they eat cakes?
Why don't they what?
Why don't they eat cakes? I don't remember. Is that from Russians?
If they don't have bread, they eat what?
Why don't they eat cakes?
Eat kicks?
No what? Never mind.
What are we talking about? Like a saying or?
No, it's like the time of Russian having starvations,
Yeah.
and like the princes from the royalty just come out and ask like, if you guys don't have bread, why don't you guys eat cakes?
Oh yeah, that's the French Revolution.
Oh yes, the French.
Yeah. So I don't know if she ever said that, but it was the wife of the French king, Marie Antoinette. And the people are,
Yeah, makes sense.
yeah, demonstrating in the street. We have no food. We have nothing to eat. And
Yeah,
she's
that's
like,
what
oh,
the
they
song
want
says.
bread? Let them eat cake. Right? And so she was basically saying, I don't care about those people. They're so greedy. You know, but later she would be guillotined. But a very similar situation here, right? Where we have a royalty or a monarch who's kind of out of touch with the population, doesn't really care too much about the plight of the people, and the people are loudly demonstrating, right? Not enough food to go around. There are critical shortcomings. What else is there, Abby?
I already mentioned it.
Okay. What else is happening? Oh, what about what about a lot of their natural resources?
Either they're selling them so no one is buying it.
Well, they're selling them. Don't know.
There's tons of words.
I know there's a lot of words. They're selling off their access to their foreign resources, right? So instead of mining their own metals, for instance, they're selling off a mine to a foreign company. So the foreign company is going to come in, they're going to mine copper or whatever it is, but then they're going to mine it, they're going to take it out of Russia, they're going to process it, and they're going to sell it on the world market. And so really all of the money and the profit is to be made over there, right? Russia's not really making a lot of money off its natural resources because it's not really working on developing them itself, right? The more you can do, like if you have natural resources, that's good. But if you can take those resources and you can manufacture them into something, then you're creating jobs, right? As you manufacture them. And then you can sell that for more than you originally could, right? The more kind of processing and manufacturing you do, the more jobs your people have, and the more you can build in profits and make more money. But not only are the Russians they're not even mining it, right? They're just saying, yeah, you can come in here and mine for this price. And so they're really kind of haven't developed their natural resources, and they're not making a lot of money, right? Plus, they have a very small industrial capacity, so they're not making a lot of money there. Plus, they don't even make enough, they don't even grow enough food to feed themselves, never mind sell it to the world market. So yeah, they've kind of sold off a lot of their natural resources. They're not very productive. They have a massive foreign debt, right, which they probably have to make payments on and pay interest on. So their economy is really a disaster, right? There's just nothing happening economically for them. And so the time is right, for a revolution. And there's a lot of extra detail in terms of prior to the revolution of how it goes, right? So the first step, we'll talk about this a little more. We're going to run out of time. We'll talk about this a little more on Friday or Monday. But the first step is that the Tsar creates the Duma, right? And the Duma is kind of an elected government. It's kind of a legislature, right, where people sit around and debate and vote and pass laws. But it's really made up of all of the rich nobility, right? So the regular people don't have any kind of representatives in this Duma. It's still all the rich people. But the Tsar doesn't really want it, and he doesn't really cooperate very well with the Duma, and it doesn't really work very well. The other thing that's coming up here that's happening, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say, is there are Soviets that are appearing. Now, what's a Soviet? Because that word will get used over and over again, but what does it mean in this period? It said it.
It's a group of farmers and workers coming out and want to let their sounds get heard by the richest people.
You started out good. Started out good. It is a group of people. Where does it say?
The Soviet Union, so
What's that?
the Soviet Union, so it's like the Communist Party of politicals.
Come on, man.
What can I say? If I know this, I don't have to sit here. I'm sitting your seat.
Okay. Okay. Can I help you out? Okay. So I'm teasing you. Soviets in this period are indeed, it was the Soviet Union. Soviets are a group of people, right? Mostly they're workers in the cities. And what starts happening is that as things get more and more confused and chaotic, and there's protests and strikes and nothing's really working, the workers kind of start to run cities themselves. Okay, so like in Moscow, for instance, everything is so chaotic. The workers basically come together, they elect a group of people, right? And those group of people start to kind of organize the city, right? And so maybe they've got, people who work in the post office as part of the Soviet, and they're like, okay, we need to keep the mail going here. And the Soviet starts to work with the post office. And they're like, we need people to kind of prevent crime here. So the Soviet starts to work and negotiate with the police officers, right? And maybe there's no buses at this point, but the bus drivers and all the people who kind of work in the city. And so the Soviet almost becomes like a city government, kind of a municipal government. They're not really legitimate, right? Because they don't really have any legal authority, but everything is so chaotic anyway that once these people step in and start to, get things moving and get things organized and things start to happen, people start to support them because they don't like chaos. They like things to be organized and for things to work. And the Soviets start to make things work again, right? They start to get these cities to run properly. And so there's one in Moscow, there's one in St. Petersburg, they're all over the place, and they're made up of workers who kind of elect representatives to this little council, and the council is the one who, they're kind of like a city government, right? But they're not real, they don't have a legal basis, but people go along with it because it's like, thank God somebody's doing something, right? So as they go through these years, the Soviets actually get more kind of authority, like the people like them and the people support them. And eventually what we'll see is that Lenin will support them as well, right? And when he's trying to get into power, one of the things he'll say is all power to the Soviets, right? So he's saying, look, these little workers' councils, they're actually doing a good job. Let's actually give them real power. Let's give them legitimate power to do what they're doing because they're doing a good job. And of course, the Soviets are happy with that. And then all the people that support the Soviets are happy with that as well. Okay, so that's kind of where the word comes from, is these original kind of workers' councils that existed before the revolution. And they actually support Lenin, and Lenin supports them because he says all power to the Soviets. That's not going to be quite true, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. So as you can see here, we're ready for a revolution. Things in Russia are a disaster. The Tsar doesn't really care too much about the plight of the people and isn't really doing anything to fix the situation either. And so eventually he's going to be forced to step down, right? Keep in mind, Russia's in the middle of World War I. They are not doing very well, right? They're poorly armed, they're poorly trained. Millions of their young men are getting slaughtered out there, and the Russians are ready for the war to be over. They don't want to deal with it anymore. They don't really have the capacity to fight it because their economy is, right? And so it's a complete mess, and that will allow our friend, well, maybe not our friend, but it'll allow Vladimir Lenin to create a situation where he's able to gain power. But that's what we'll deal with on Monday. Oh yeah, I'm gonna hand back your quizzes here, and then but we'll review them on Monday. But I'll give them to you just so you have them. Okay. All right. Let's see. David. Ryan. You're welcome. Abby. Regina. And Maria's not here, and Lear is not here, and I think that's all I have. Okay. Okay, so we'll go over this on Monday. Until then, anyone have any questions? Concerns? Complaints? Criticisms? Everybody's okay? All right. Okay, that's all I have for you then. You can pack it up, and I'll see you on Monday.